Good morning, everyone. I'm Sriram Krishnan. I head up international growth at Tinder. I used to head up international growth at Spotify many years back. So I was part of the global expansion team that brought Spotify to Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, and a bunch of other countries. After that, I left to join Human, a startup based in San Francisco that got acquired by Tinder. So now I run international growth at Tinder. So this is my third year at Magic, so I'm Malaysian, so very, very proud and humbled and happy to be back and doing this, and also very happy for Magic to for some reason keep inviting me back. So very, very, very thankful. So thank you to Magic for that. I'd like to talk about a few things today, and I'm going to lay out sort of a groundwork of what I think would be interesting. So. It's called Turbocharging Growth for Early Stage Startups. So I'm going to be introducing a few concepts. These concepts are not going to be anything, it's not going to be complex, it's not going to be rocket science. I'm going to create this mental model for all of you so that you understand what levers you can use to turbocharge or to accelerate your startup's growth. And then because we have 1 hour or 1.5 hours, we're going to dive into some of these concepts or some of these channels or levers in more detail. So this means we're going to call out someone from the audience, talk about your company, and talk about how we can turbocharge your company, for example, right? So it's meant to be covering strategic things that are important, but also let's get our hands a bit dirty and dive into the nitty-gritty. But before I start, I have to introduce this concept, or this very important notion of product market fit. So how many of you are working in a tech startup? Put your hands up. Okay. How many of you are not in? How many of you are investors? How many of you are not in the tech startup world? How many of you are enthusiasts? Okay. So that's good to know. So product market fit is basically when you're building a product when you're building a solution for a problem. And when you've identified a solution, a problem worth solving, and you've found your first 100 or 1,000 or 2,000 customers, and they're engaged with your product, it sort of goes without saying that you've got your product market fit. Product market fit doesn't necessarily mean you must have millions of customers. It merely means that you've solved a very, very compelling problem for your consumer, and that you've got a set of consumers, whether it's hundreds, thousands, whether it's in the B2B or B2C space, that value your service. So you need to have that as a bare minimum. Because if you don't turbocharge your, if you don't have product market fit and you start growing your service or your company or your startup, what happens is you're going to see a lot of churn. So this is a situation that you might fall into, right? You might be going at a very fast speed, but you're actually not going anywhere at all. The illusion of growth. You'll encounter the illusion of growth, but in reality, you're actually churning users as you go along. So this is the I would say the bare minimum, the minimum requirement of the minimum expectation that you should set your team up to, or at least hold yourself accountable towards before investing in growth. So how do you build a growth-oriented organization? It's a question that a lot of people ask. At a very high level, you have what people call product growth. Product growth is applicable in the consumer tech businesses or maybe B2B businesses that are software-oriented. So there's product growth and there's growth marketing or business growth. Product growth is all about improving your funnel, making sure that consumers are retained in your product longer than they are right now. It's about making sure that they convert from landing on your website to filling up a form to capturing the emails or downloading your app from the App Store, registering and signing up and using your service. So all these funnel-related stuff are all product growth. And let's assume that you've got product market fit and that your product solves a problem and it's compelling enough to be used and that you've got some form of basic usage of your product, right? So we're going to talk about the levers on the business growth side or the marketing growth side that you can basically use. And again, I want to iterate that a lot of these concepts are not going to be new, but we're going to frame them in a way such that you have, if you're a CEO or a VP marketing or a COO of a startup, or if you want to start a company in the future, at least you know how to take all of these things in perspective and then figure out where to invest your resources in. So one of the things that I touched upon earlier was getting your first core user base, right? That 1,000 users or 200 users or 300 users who love and value your product so much. In order for you to get them, you have to quite literally, almost always and oftentimes go door to door, one by one. You have to, like, that hustle is something that you can't replicate. And it's very important, especially in the early sort of stage of your startup. And you can't scale this, right? Like if I'm starting a company right now, and if I need a few people to dog food it, I'm gonna have to go to every one of you and ask you to try it out. And that's just the very nature of it. Or if I'm like some people, I could tweet it out and get 100 people to test it. So you need to actually get very involved and find your first 100 customers and cater to them, right? And it oftentimes means you have to do it one user at a time. What this also means is that your first consumers invariably end up sort of becoming your product managers. So whether you're in the B2B space or B2C space, B2B is business to business, B2C is business to consumer, your first customers are going to be your product managers. So you're going to have to prioritize building features for them or solutions for them versus ones that aren't your customers yet, because these are people who value your product and like you enough to actually care about you. So part of, I mean, and it's part of any growth curve. These are the first sets of users that are gonna help you spread the word. They're gonna, I mean, people talk about the growth curve, but people talk as if it's very easy to accomplish, but people don't talk about the first few weeks or months or days that it takes to actually get that accelerated growth, right? This is when you actually have to invest in people, in the first few sets of people. Overnight success takes months or years. Airbnb, for example, when they first launched, it's a pretty humbling slide, because Airbnb now is a $30-40 billion company, it's pretty big. Everyone knows Airbnb. All of us have used Airbnb. But if you look at 2008 and 2011, that's when they basically had to hustle. And the way they did that was they were very hacky. So they actually found a way to post Airbnb openings on Craigslist, or poach Craigslists or message people who post on Craigslist about rental openings in their apartments, links to Airbnb, and they were very hacky, but over time they took off, right? So a lot of people will talk to you about this, and it's so very easy to get excited about this, but a lot of the hard work will have to happen here. And the success of your startup is often determined at this stage, not at this stage. It's much more difficult to plow through this than it is to do this. I mean, they're all difficult, but this is when your patience will be tested, your sanity will be tested. This is the time when your consumers, you think your consumers are giving you a hard time, but they're giving you hard love, right? So that's basically now that you've gotten a product and you feel like you've gotten some product market fit, and now that you've gone and gotten 200 people or 400 people onto your product, and you feel like you've got some value, you've created some value, what are the next steps that you can take to amplify your growth? So before we do that, I want to talk about a couple of other companies that have done similar things. So I call this the yawn break, because I was told that we had 1.5 hours, and during lunchtime. So if I was sitting through a presentation for 1.5 hours long during lunchtime, I would yawn numerous times. Product Hunt is another one. Product Hunt is a website that makers and creators and developers actually post stuff to when they launch. And when they first started, it was basically Ryan Hoover going to individuals, asking them to do to post, talking to them individually. So Ryan Hoover is he's a very charismatic individual. He's a very likable person, and he spoke to every one of the companies that posted their products on Product Hunt. So, and he still does that. So, and Product Hunt invariably grew because of word of mouth and because of how sort of much Ryan Hoover hustled in the beginning. Tinder grew in a similar vein. It was founded in Los Angeles, and at that point, it was a very small team, so they went to sororities and fraternities all over the West Coast, one by one, and eventually, again, overnight success takes months and years, right? Tinder has been around for 5+ years. A lot of people know about Tinder in the past 2-3 years, but not many people know about the fact that they've been around for that long, and the fact that they had very humble beginnings. So this is something that, in this day and age, a lot of people, like how many of you have downloaded a new app in the past 1 week? Okay, that's not bad. But if you asked this question, a year ago, all of you would have raised your hand. I don't think I've downloaded a new app in the past 1 week, 1 month, or in the past 2 months, right? So there's a lot of noise out there. We've got so many apps on our phone. I don't think I need to download another new app unless it solves a very important use case. So in this new world, just because you build something, it doesn't mean people will use it. You have to go door to door. You have to go person to person to get your product. So another important thing that you need to also start thinking about in your new company or when you have a product that kind of solves a problem and you sort of see some engagement, some retention, is having a North Star. So what does a North Star mean? North Star is basically a metric that the entire organization, or an objective that an entire organization can work towards. So if you are a company like Uber, then your North Star could be time it takes to get a driver, right? I'm making things up. It could be number of suppliers on the streets, but number of suppliers on the streets doesn't make any sense because it's not solving a problem. Your North Star should sort of be linked to a metric that solves a consumer problem or a pain point. So I would say number of minutes it takes for a consumer to get a driver, and then you sort of build your organization so that happens. So it from 10 minutes to 2 minutes to 1 minute and 30 seconds, right? So that's one example. I could be wrong, but that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is from Facebook's perspective. A true North Star metric, which everyone talks about, is monthly active users. But that's it's an important metric, but it's also sort of very high level. It's a vanity metric, but something that's more relevant, which is linked to MAU, could be time spent on website. Right? So if you look at Facebook and how they've evolved their newsfeed, evolved the content that you can see on the newsfeed, it's all geared towards getting us users to stare at our phones, at our Facebook newsfeed much longer. So what has happened in the past 1 year? Videos have come up, right? So that's another metric that's another tool that they've used to basically increase time spent on websites. So have a true North Star. Could be MAU, could be 1 million hours, could be 200K pictures. It has to be big. It has to be, if it's achievable, it's not something that you should strive for. It has to be a long shot. It has to be something that is going to scare your engineers, your designers, your product person, your CEO, and your board members, right? So it has to be something, if you're starting out and if you're in the consumer business, it could be 100,000 MAU and or 200,000 pictures posted if you're a photo app. Now, the reason why this is important is because then you can align your cross-functional teams so that this metric can be hit. So what am I talking about? So let's say in your small company you have, let's say you design. I'm gonna make sure this is big enough so that you guys can see it. Let's say that you choose to have time spent on website as your key metric, right? And then you're going to have, as part of the funnel, you're going to have, this is basically acquisition, and this is conversion. So let's forget about conversion. You're a very small company. You need to figure out where you're going to focus your attention and resources on. Let's say you're going to focus your attention and investment in this area, which is basically mid-funnel, which is where all the behavior and activity happens, right? So imagine you've registered for your product, you've installed, you come through Facebook, you come through organic word of mouth, you've installed your product, you've registered for the service, and now you're taking your first swipe at Tinder, or you're adding your first friend at Facebook, or you're uploading your first picture on Instagram. So this is the meat, right? Now, what this means is if you have a marketing person in your, what do I mean by aligning a cross-functional team so that you focus on the core metric is if you have a data scientist, an engineer, a designer, a product manager, a marketeer, you basically tell them to come together and figure out ways to expand this, to make this better. So the marketeer will go, this is something that happens in the product. I've got no impact or influence on this. I've got no impact, I've got very limited influence because my influence as a marketeer is top of funnel, right? There's nothing, there's certain things a marketer can do. The marketer can talk about, hey, swipe better or upload more pictures. But apart from that, you're not gonna directly help certain metrics here. But a designer could do that, an engineer could do that. So another example, if your North Star metric is MAU, or if your North Star metric is, let's say, number of installs, which it shouldn't be, but let's say it is. Then you have a cross-functional team here that consists of engineers, designers, product managers, data scientists, and marketers that look at the problem and say, okay, how can we get more installs? Now, in this instance, the marketer will play a more important role because the marketer will be like, in order for us to get more installs, we need to be attacking these 4 or 5 different channels. In order for us to attack these 5 channels, we need to understand where they're coming from and so on. So depending on what your North Star metric is, different people will be involved, but it's very important to make sure that they're all aligned towards the same goal. If you're a very small a company like Facebook can afford to have, on one hand, get users to WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook Messenger, Oculus, and Facebook Lite, Facebook Free. They've got so many different products and so many different channels. And then on the conversion side for them, I don't think they have conversion because I don't think we all pay for anything Facebook related, but conversion for them could be time spent on the website, right? So Facebook's large enough to actually have teams dedicated at optimizing every single point of the funnel, every single feature so that you spend more time on the website, right? This is their aim. So they will optimize Instagram so that they'll help creators or influencers upload pictures easier so that you as a consumer are able to see them better. They have all sorts of teams that look into this, but you're not Facebook. So you have to, so because you're not Facebook, you're gonna have to pick and choose which metrics you have to focus on. Now, again, going back to what I said earlier, there's no growth without retention and engagement. You can't grow your product or service or company if your product doesn't retain users or engage users properly. So what I would advise new companies or new startups to do is focus on engagement and retention. That's where value is created, right? You know value is created if the consumers are lingering long enough or staying long enough on your product. So have that as your North Star metric. It could be time spent on your website. It could be, let's say, Airbnb. If you're an Uber or a logistics company, it could be number of orders, transactions a month. If you are a company a startup that allows you to share pictures, it could be number of pictures shared or number of pictures uploaded. No, so have that as your core metric, and then organize your teams accordingly. If you have too many focus areas, then you will die. Because again, startups don't die because of starvation; they die because of indigestion. If you end up doing so many things at once, you become very scatterbrained, and you just end up losing focus. And focus is very important. Right? So I spoke about this a little bit. Acquisition, retention, conversion, engagement. I'm going to give you a little bit more, just some more examples of what these things mean. So acquisition metrics could be number of installs, number of registered users, and if you're going to have if you're going to have number of registered users as your focus, it means your teams, your cross-functional teams are going to be focused on how the users land at the App Store. And I know there's a session on App Store optimizations coming up, but how do users land on your App Store, and what's the best way to convert them into a registered user, which means the onboarding flow is what your team is going to focus on. If registered user is your North Star metric. Now, engagement could be time spent on website. This means how can we know the users are coming in, we know that they're staying on the website or the service. How can we expand that? Do we introduce new types of content? Do we introduce new types of engagement hooks? Do we introduce new ways of sharing information within the app, outside the app, or outside the website, right? So these are invariably the discussions that you'll get yourself into if this is your metric. Conversion is very interesting. Conversion is, there are many ways to attack conversion. So if you're a Spotify, conversion at Spotify means getting free users to pay for the product, right? So if you want to focus on conversion, Spotify focused on numerous things. One was obviously top of funnel, getting as many users into the funnel as possible and converting them. One of the key features that Spotify had back in the day as a tool to convert people was mobile access, right? So if you want to use Spotify for free, you can only consume it on the desktop. But if you want to pay, if you want to use it on the mobile, then you pay for it. So you feature gate. So if conversion is your focus, then you feature gate certain things. So that's one way you can incentivize people to convert. And then if you want to, so you can build new features. You can restrict new features. You can introduce ads. There's so many combos and mechanisms you can introduce. And then on the flip side, if you want to improve conversion, then you can tackle it from a payments perspective. Right? So what does that mean? This means you're talking about churn. This means you're talking about maximizing the number of payment options. So which means credit card, bank transfers, check, SMS, wallets, all sorts of things, because this is part of your focus, right? So conversion is very interesting. So if you focus on conversion, you invariably have to decide on features, ads, payments, churn, and then figure out where you're going to focus on. So there's depth and there's breadth. And there's so many things you can work with. So what are you going to focus on? If you're a small company, retention, engagement, try to get your users to spend as long as possible on your app. Unless you're a service that doesn't require that. So if you're a service like Clue, for example, which is a very large female health app, then all you got to, like MyFitnessPal is another example. MyFitnessPal, they don't need, MyFitnessPal is an app that allows you to track your calorie intake and so on. You don't need people to stay on the app for a long time, right? So what you do is all you need people to do is basically come onto your app and then key in those details and then go away. And then if you want to focus on getting people to come back once or twice, then you have a different set of strategy to tackle that. Then you have push notifications. Then you have emails. Then you have all these other levers that you can use. So the key message here is, if you're a small company, figure out which parts of the funnel you want to focus on. I think start with retention and engagement, and then figure out what types of features you want to introduce, what types of metrics you want to go after specifically, and then you can organize your teams around that. Go for depth, go for focus, and then if people end up staying on your site longer, on your app longer, if your team gets larger, then you can have a broader focus within the same area. So you can be tackling retention from this perspective and that perspective. And then as your company grows larger, you can have numerous objectives that all solve the same problem, or the new North Star, which could be monthly active users, right, or conversion. So just keep that in context. So another yawn break. So I want to take this opportunity to talk about, to ask you guys what sort of companies you're working on, or companies that you'd like us to go through right now to figure out what their core metrics are. So if anyone could give me an example of a company, a startup that they're working at, and what their North Star metrics, and then we can go through whatever, like what's interesting for them. So we can start with, okay, let's say Adeline. Adeline is a speaker, and she's head of product monetization at Clue. So what's your North Star? Or what's Clue's North Star?
We are going with, I don't think it's techniques as an example.
But what would be a broad metric that you guys are going after?
We are going with
Number
number of data points.
of data points, okay.
Looking at a tracker.
So Clue is a tracker, and their North Star metric is number of data points, right? So my guess is, number of data points is not necessarily a top of the funnel problem, right? Because top of the funnel means getting people to actually register for your product, or not register for your product. That's a mid-funnel That's a mid-funnel thing, like MyFitnessPal. You want people to come back to your product so that they contribute a lot of data points to it. So if you're a mid-funnel product, then you have to. Then there's so many ways you can sort of skin the cat. One is through CRM. CRM is an interesting way. You can target people. If people have push notifications switched off, then you can target them through Facebook ads. If they have push notifications switched on, then you can target them through push notifications. And you can target them through social. If they're friends on the product, you can let them know. So that's just another way of thinking about it. Spotify, for example, initially when they were, Spotify had numerous focus areas. One focus areas was getting people to spend more time on the product. So what they realized was, hey, you know what, we should incentivize users to create playlists, because we found out that users who created playlists are far more likely to use the product X weeks down the line. So everything Spotify did initially was to encourage you to build playlists. So the first few things that you see would be, hey, this is a playlist for you, this is a playlist for you. What we also found out over time was that most consumers in the music world fall in two categories. One is you're a lean forward user, and one is a lean back user. A lean forward user is a user that's very active and wants to curate her or his own playlist, right? A lean back user doesn't care about what he or she is listening to, so long as some music is playing. Most people in the world fall in the latter category, which is lean back users. So this means that Spotify shouldn't incentivize users to create playlists, because most users in the world won't create playlists. This means Spotify should incentivize users to follow playlists, right? So that's why you can see discovery, which discovery was promoted instead of something else. So discovery basically shows you, hey, there's a playlist for every mood. There's a playlist for every holiday. There's a playlist for every vacation. A playlist for every situation. So because of that simple understanding of user, that core metric changed. So these are some examples of how companies find out what. And North Star metrics can change over time, but you have to understand how your users interact and behave to sort of adjust accordingly. Another thing that I want to introduce, concept I want to introduce, is performance marketing or just advertising. A lot of people here, how many of you are familiar with user acquisition, Facebook user acquisition, running ads on Facebook? How many of you have done it? Okay, so performance marketing is, in this day and age, is known as, is basically digital marketing, it's very trackable. It's almost always on Facebook, Instagram, Google, who sort of combined have 80-90% of the share of the digital market, and it's very ROI driven. So performance marketing means ROI driven marketing, more or less. So some people use performance marketing as a blunt object. Some people use it as a precision tool. Before you spend money trying to understand, before you spend money on performance marketing, you need to figure out why you're doing this, why you're spending the money. Are you a free app? Are you a freemium app? Are you a paid-only app? The reason why this is important is because your strategies and how you spend the money would differ, right? If you are a free app, it means that before spending money to promote your app, you better make sure that your retention is so strong so that every dollar you spend would result in X users staying onto the product in week 4 or week 5. If you have very, very poor retention, if users are not staying on your product, then don't spend money. Don't spend money promoting your product, right? So if you're a free product, you need to make sure that you've got very strong retention before you start spending money promoting your product. If you're a freemium product, right, then you need to make sure that these few things happen. One is your conversion from free to paid is strong. Spotify has a 30 to 35%, 30 to 40% conversion rate from free to paying, which is world class. No one else has a higher percentage than this. Gaming apps traditionally have anywhere between 0.2 to 1.5% conversion rate. That's very healthy. Some people have 7, some people have 5. So make sure that your conversion, your conveyor belt from free to paid is strong, right? So that's one. The second thing is make sure that you also understand and this is very important for apps that charge consumers. You need to understand the value of a paying customer. So there's something called average revenue per user, ARPU. There's something called average revenue per paying user, ARPPU. There's something called LTV, lifetime value of a consumer. You need to understand and nail these things, because you need to, a lifetime value of a consumer is on average, if I've acquired all of you, if I've spent money on a marketing campaign and acquired everyone here, right? A small percentage of you would end up paying for the product, right? Now, lifetime value of a consumer is on average, how much do each of you contribute to me over a 1, 3, 5-year period, right? So this is taken on an average basis. Now, there's lifetime value of a paying user, there's lifetime value of a general user. You need to understand these things, because then you can spend money profitably. So then, before spending money, if you understand what your LTV, whether it's a 1-year LTV, 1-month LTV, 3-year, 5-year LTV, then you can confidently spend $2 now, because I know if I spend $2 in acquiring all of you now, I know that some of you will pay 10 cents, some of you will pay 5 cents, some of you will contribute 6 cents over time. I'll get my $2 back within month 8, right? And then I'll have to go a step. What I will do is go and take a step deeper and figure out which one of you are the ones that spend the money. Then I find out, okay, there's 3 people here, 5 people, and 8 people there. And then I'll cluster all of you together and then start targeting you guys. Then I know for a fact that if I spend $8, instead of getting the $8 back within month 7, because some of you are paying, some of you are not paying, I'll get the $8 back within week 3 or month 2, because it's a more focused cohort of users that I'm going after, right? So you need to know these things, and this also applies to if you're a paid-only product. You need to understand what your lifetime value of a customer is. There are 3 different formulas for that. You can go online and figure it out. It changes by country, it changes by campaign. It's fairly complicated. You need to get an analyst or your product person has to look into it, but you have to do it, because investors, or it's just good. I mean, you're not going to sink money in without knowing whether you're getting it back, right? So some of these are the things I mentioned. So CPI is cost per install, which is a very high level vanity metric on how much each user you've acquired would cost. ROI is return on investment. So this is basically, if I've acquired all of you for $1 each, right? And within a 1-week period, let's say the 100 people here, within a 1-week period, you've contributed $80 back, right? Within week 2, it's $100 back. So I break even in week 2. So the ROI in week 2 is $100. So it's very time dependent, of course. LTV, CAC is cost of customer acquisition. LTV is lifetime value. How long? Like LTV, CAC is basically you want your LTVs to be very high and your cost to be very low, right? So over time, you want your LTV to CAC to go up. So these are things that you need to understand before embarking on a performance marketing or an online advertising campaign. A lot of companies, look, I think we're all guilty of this in the past, or still doing it. A lot of companies spend money without knowing why they're spending the money and without knowing what they're optimizing for. And it takes a lot of work to understand these things. At the very least, what I would do if this seems too overwhelming, I'll look at a very simple metric. I'll run an ad buy for 2 weeks within a certain cohort, if you're a freemium service or a paid service, right? Within a certain cohort of users, and then for a 2-week period, and then switch it off, right? Let's say if I've spent $100, I'll switch it off and see out of from this cohort of users, how much money did they give me back, and how does that curve look like, right? If I get my $100 back within month 4, month 5, then I know for a fact that my payback period is month 4, month 5. Then I'll try to figure out, okay, how can I make the payback period shorter? How can I make people pay me back or sign up for my a la carte service or subscription service faster so I get my money back quicker, right? So I would start doing that instead of worrying about these things. This means you need to have better attribution. That's another conversation to be had, but I would start with that. Now, let's say you say, Ram, we don't need to work on performance marketing because we care more about our brand. A lot of people spend money on brand stuff without quantifying what brand success metrics look like. So if you're working on brand stuff, and if you're running stuff through digital, social, running stuff to Google, Facebook, then there are other ways to quantify it, right? VCR is if you're running a video, it's video completion rate. If it's 100%, then you know people actually care about your video long enough to see through it. There's brand lift surveys that you can do through Facebook and Google, I believe, before, after. When you watch YouTube videos, sometimes they show, have you heard of these brands before? And then you're like annoyed and you just skip, you're trying to skip that. That's some of the things that they do. But there are certain metrics on the brand side that you can also hold yourself accountable to. But these things I wouldn't necessarily worry about just yet if you're a very small company. So within the whole sphere of digital marketing or performance marketing, if you're in this long enough, or if you're deep enough and alert enough, you'll identify arbitrage opportunities. So what does arbitrage opportunities mean? It means that there are certain publishers local in some countries that might offer you a lower cost per install than others. There might be certain ad networks which okay quality, which will provide good returns. So this will pop up, right? And what this also means is there are other publishers out there that might provide, other newer publishers out there that would provide more value. So Pinterest, Snapchat, relatively new, Quora, relatively new, but still untested. So if you've got your Facebook, Google, Instagram operations down to a T, I would start exploring a bunch of other publishers also, because these are often overlooked, but there's so much value that you can have. All right, so I spoke about Facebook, Snapchat, and digital. I'm going to stop and ask questions from people, because anyone has questions on either the performance marketing side or on the product growth side. Yep. What's that? Yeah. Sorry, CPIN? Yeah. Yeah. So the first question was CPI and CAC. The second question is ROI, could be ARPU, why not ARPU, what are other ROI figures? So cost per install is a cost per, a CAC, I want to preface this by saying people may define CPIs and CACs very differently. So that's one, right? Companies have different definitions. Cost per install means that how much does it cost you to get one user to install your product? But cost of customer acquisition may not necessarily be cost per install because they don't register for your product, right? So it depends on what your definition of CAC is. So it could be CPI, it could be something else. So that could be very subjective and vague, very much company dependent. From an ROI perspective, ARPU, it goes back to what are you focusing on. ARPU is ARPU. I mean, if you're trying to optimize for ARPU, it means you're trying to optimize for a broader cohort of users. So average revenue per user would include paying users and non-paying users, right? Now, I don't think it's a good metric to optimize for, only because it's not specific enough. When it comes to tracking and having and coming up with objectives that like your teams can sort of rally around, it's very important to have clarity. And ARPU is just one of these metrics that I don't think, from an advertising perspective, I think it makes sense because it's apples to apples, right? You have ad dollars coming in and your user base. So your advertising ARPU is like Snapchat. Snapchat, people talk about ARPU all the time because that's the only way they make money, advertising, right? So that's where it's relevant. But if you are a service that doesn't rely on advertising, that relies on people, consumers paying products, then I'd look at ARPPU, average revenue average revenue per paying user, which is a more specific metric to go after. So so that's one. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean ROI, right? ROI could be defined in numerous ways also. So for example, at Match Group, at a per campaign level, so Tinder is part of the Match group. Match group owns Plenty of Fish, Match, Tinder, OkCupid, Meetic, and a bunch of other brands, right? So campaigns that are run at Match Group, for example, the ROI is defined as 5-year LTV, right? This is the ROI. If the users are acquired below the 5-year LTV, we're golden, right? So the ROI very much depends on what specific metric you're going after. The reason why I said to begin with, it's so much easier for you to start a campaign and stop after a day or two, and then see how much that campaign contributes from a return on investment perspective, is because that's the easiest way to start. But as you get more complex, you're gonna figure out that there are more interesting and important metrics to optimize towards, right? Which is also part of the problem, because in the world of, like, if you track everything, and if you know what your ARPU, ARPPU, your conversion rate, your CAC, your LTV, your ROI is, what are you going to be focusing on, right? So then it very much is dependent on what your overall company focus is. If your focus is getting more revenue, then that's a whole entire ball game. Then you might be focusing on price points. You might be focusing on volume times price. Like, revenue equals to price times volume, right? Or price times sales. And then you break down price by your product, you break down sales, and then figure out which levers you can move. If your entire company objective is ARPU, advertising ARPU, then that's a different metrics you're going to go after. If your focus is on ARPPU, or then you construct your objectives based on you construct your metrics based on your objectives. So yeah. Sorry? Based on sales and what? Cost of sales. So for B2B sales, so the fixed costs, so there's fixed costs and variable costs. The fixed cost would be your labor cost. So you don't actually you wouldn't necessarily, you don't consider that, because that's part of a different, in your P&L, that's a different cost element, right? You take into account the cost that like marketing costs. So the same thing, right? How much, like, events, creating content, targeting, like, that would be considered the cost. So no, but that's a fixed cost, so you won't actually consider that as part of your CAC, right? So for example, I'm organizing an event where 100 people show up, right? And the event cost me $100,000, right? And out of this event, I've got salespeople everywhere, and we've signed up 5 potential customers, and the ACV, annual contract value, is $200,000, right? So then you prorate and you say, okay, the cost of acquiring these customers were 100,000 divided by the number of customers you get. So you don't consider the cost of salespeople. You don't consider your labor costs, because you consider that fixed cost. So you consider the variable costs that go into acquiring that customer. That's how I would do it. In the B2B world, you have very different metrics. You have ACV, TCVs, you have churn. Like, churn is very important. Your ARR, like, okay, in business to business, you have a metric called MRR, ARR, I forget the R now. Anyway, Google it, you'll find whether it's recurring revenue or annual recurring revenue, I forget what it is. But you'll have metrics like this that are more important that you optimize towards. So if you're in a B2B world, you have clarity on how much money you put in versus how much money you get, right? Because it's very straightforward. It's very transactional. Whereas in the consumer world, you have to invest a lot in tracking, attribution, events, like all these things to understand where your traffic is coming from, how much they're contributing. Because at any given time, if you have organic growth and paid growth, you're gonna have to figure out where your organic growth is coming from. You need to have proper channel attribution. And then through Facebook, you need to figure out how do these users convert over time. So there's a lot more infrastructure investment needed. Whereas in the B2B world, there's some investment needed, but from the onset, it's a bit more clear as to how you're getting these customers and how much money are they giving back to you. Any questions? Okay. So another concept that I want to introduce is, which I think is not very, it's not rocket science, it's PR. PR is a often underutilized tool that people don't use, but it helps with word of mouth, it helps with credibility, it helps with legitimacy. Again, going back to my point about there's so much noise these days. I mean, there's so many apps out there vying for your attention. People are less inclined to download new apps these days. How are you gonna get above the fray? How are you gonna capture the attention of a consumer? PR is very useful. Back in the day, if you're an early app developer, there's a saying: if you build it, they will come. That's bullshit. They won't come. You have to go out there and get them, whether it's one user at a time or through all these different channels. Back in the day, it worked. These days, you can't do it. Not everyone's PR savvy. There's so many ways you can optimize your PR for growth. Oftentimes people utilize PR on a sort of one-off basis when they have something to launch. They engage journalists and they're like, okay, done. I've got this spike that's amazing, and it's gone. First day pops are boring. We know that happens, but the trick is, how do you create sustained interest and momentum? How do you make sure that people keep coming back? How do you make sure that you have stories to share? You want to build your thought leadership. You want to build your brand. One downside of this is you can't track it properly, because you invariably will end up assigning this as organic growth. But if you are savvy, if you do this, if you construct stories that are relevant, if you promote the right people, then it could blow up, right? So this is a portfolio company of mine. I won't mention which one, but they launched a while back, long time back, and that modest growth, right? This is something that you'd come to expect as part of any growth trajectory. Now, at this point, it was family and friends. Hey, test the product out. Let me know what you think. Let me know whether it's buggy. And this is like, oh shit, it works. Okay, let's do something about it. So from here to here, it's going to individuals, going to friends, asking them to test it, feedback, tweet about it, talk about it, being an annoying pest, and making sure that you get the word out, right? And you can see growth is exponential, because if people like your product, if you show value, then it takes off. Now, it continues taking off, but then then we cleverly we orchestrated a press release. We got a lot of people talking about it, and you can see the jump, right? And the growth continued going after that. And then we obviously sustained this through more PR. So think of PR as a way to boost your growth rate. So assuming you've got a very exponential growth rate, PR can help with that. If you've got a very linear, if you're a late stage product, linear growth rate, PR may not necessarily improve your growth curve, but it adds legitimacy, keeps you top of mind, and it helps contribute to long-term growth. So PR may not necessarily contribute to short-term growth if you're a mature product. It contributes to long-term growth, because people will think about it, people talk about it, and that helps. So there's what we call a multiplier effect with PR. Sometimes it's high. In this case, it's 10x or 8x, 7x. But if you're in a later stage company, a more mature product, it could be 0.1x, could be 0.2x, could be 1.1x. But these things help, right? And there's so many ways you can define your PR strategy. I believe in bottom-up, top-down echo chamber effect. So what this means is, if you're planning your PR outreach, you don't necessarily have to go for the Straits Times, for the Malay Mail. Go for the mom and pop blogger. This is the way I would do it, because I want to boil the ocean and get as much coverage as possible. So go for the mom and pop bloggers within tech, within consumer, within AR, VR, the small scrappy ones who are willing to interview you and talk about what you do. Go for the big ones also. Then you have this bottom-up, top-down coverage, and then you have an echo chamber of people who are going to talk about you all the time. Diversify your list of spokespersons. I think this is applicable if you're a much larger company, if you're a 1 to 5 person company, CEO and founder. should be the spokesperson, but if you're big enough, maybe 5, 6, 10, then you want to introduce different spokespersons because your PR person, your designer could be a spokesperson because then your designer can talk to design magazines and architecture magazines, for example, right? Because then you have more coverage that way. Whereas you as a CEO, it may not be relevant. Your product person your engineer could be interviewed by more technical publications. So you're sort of expanding your list of publications. Think of as many stories, whether like on your advisory board, whether investor based, your metrics, milestones, releases, partnerships. I mean, like there are many portfolio companies of mine that engage, that basically as a matter of necessity pitch 2 different stories to press every month, right? Because they're sitting on lots of data. So what they do is, hey, you know what? We know, and I'm making stuff up now. We know that. I mean, let's use Uber for example. They're sitting on so much data. They know that people travel from A to B in this country all the time, right? So on month 1, they'll pitch that story, and people will eat it up. Oh my God, the 2 most used Uber routes or Uber points are this and this. And then the next month, they'll introduce Uber ice cream, which I think people know, right? Which is a great brand play. But then they'll do a PR wave on that. And then the month later, they'll resort to a metrics-driven PR release. They'll talk about the restaurants that most people go to, and they'll list it out in top 10 format. These are the restaurants that people go to, right? And you read all this, and it's interesting because you eat it up, but it's relevant, it's interesting, it's in the zeitgeist. But what Uber is doing is through content, through data points, are basically getting the word out, right? This may not directly improve growth, but it keeps Uber in the conversations. Lastly, nurture a relationship with journalists. I mean, it's very easy, but just treat them like human beings. Don't give them press releases all the time. Hang out with them, talk to them, the usual stuff. And again, the thing about PR is it can contribute to growth. It can, and it will. Over time, it won't. It'll contribute to its thought leadership and brand, which will contribute to growth long term. There will be a multiplier. There will be enough goodwill created that you can bank on to push other stuff in the future, whether it's product releases, whether it's more content. So it does work. All right, next one. Whew. I need some water. Distribution versus brand. So what does this mean? 1 second. So another lever that you can use is partnerships, right? I mean, partnerships is so sexy. It's easy. You get to meet a lot of people. It's fun, but it's also a time sink. So I want to give you guys a way to frame your partnership discussions, right? There's distribution partnerships and there's brand partnerships. And then within distribution, if you're in the consumer tech space, assuming that you are, or in the B2B software space, there are sort of legacy players and internet players, right? What I call legacy players are players that are big. So banks, credit cards, telcos are big. And these folks have huge population coverage. And if you work with them, they will unlock a lot of potential for you. Instantly, you'll get access to, let's say, 30 million people in Malaysia. If you work with Maxis, you get instant access to 8 million people or 10 million people, right? But developing for legacy partners can take a lot of time and effort, and it may not be worth it. But I'm just introducing the concepts, and we'll go into that a little bit more in more detail in a bit. There's also, as I said, so there's access to large customer base. There's long lead time, distraction. So the thing about distribution partnerships you have to keep in mind is it's more often than not, it seems very enticing. If you're a very small company, it seems very enticing to be involved in conversations like this, but it's actually, it's such a time sink. It's distracting. It requires a lot more resources than you think it does, and it's not going to end up being important for your partner. Spotify works with telcos. Maxis and Spotify, I think, had a partnership. Globe and Spotify had a partnership, and that drove a lot of downloads and registrations for Spotify, but it took a long time to come up with these deals, right? There's also internet partnerships that allow you to piggyback off your partner's reach. This is quid pro quo, so it's value exchange. You don't necessarily have to utilize a lot of engineers or designers. Maybe it's a 2-3 week, 4 week long initiatives. It could be, Spotify did something with PayPal. It's very easy to do. These are what we call value exchanges. So I would err on the side of caution and only consider partnerships like this, so long as it doesn't absorb a lot of your engineering, design, and product resources. Quid pro quo relationships and partnerships are very easy to do. Now, there's brand partnerships. So brand partnerships, again, may seem fluffy, but drives conversation, gives you legitimacy, gives you a lot of credibility. And just like PR, it doesn't contribute to short-term growth. It could if you amplify that through PR, so which means if you're doing something like Uber ice cream, it's not a brand partnership. Like Uber and Spotify have that integration, right? It's not a new user acquisition campaign. It's basically a cool partnership campaign that allows you to listen to songs in your car. It's not going to add new users to the service. It's basically a cool thing. But because of that, both parties got a lot of points for that cool partnership. So drove a lot of conversation. Numerous other things you can do. Again, you have to optimize for the right metrics. With brand partnerships, you need to focus on brand-related metrics, so PR, number of unique views, your website, how that contributes to long-term growth. Consider multipliers, but it's also it contributes to your overall sort of success if it's easy to pull off. Influencer marketing. How many of you have heard of influencer marketing? Okay, so 5 years ago, influencer marketing wasn't a thing, but now it's huge because of the success of YouTube, Facebook, Snapchat. There are entire generations of kids that now grow up. Back in the day, we wanted to be scientists and badminton players and football players. These days, kids aspire to be YouTube influencers and Snapchat influencers. So that is a pretty phenomenal change, right? So influencer marketing is a tried and tested way to grow your sort of product. Now, the reason why, if you're a small company, you have limited resources, time, employees to pull things off. So the easiest thing you can do is what I call is to actually stand on the shoulder of giants, right? What this means is you utilize another company's or individual's brand and voice to get your word out, right? A brand partnership is a way to do that. You utilize your partner's voice to get your word out. Now, this could be time consuming because it involves another company, but an easier way to do that is to utilize an individual's voice or brand and reach to get your word out. So that's basically that's what influencer marketing is. Now, it depends on what your company does. If your company if you're a mobile app developer, then YouTube is more interesting because YouTube is a captive service that people use. So if you're watching a YouTube video, there's a high chance that you're not doing anything else. So you're able to get your users to download the product. If you're on Facebook, you tend to be scatterbrained. People can skip your ad. YouTube videos, it's highly captive. If you want to build your brand through more successful, more prominent influencers, then you want to use Snapchat and Facebook because that's where most people are. So there are various ways to do this, right? And there are ways to quantify it also. On YouTube, for example, 90% of the views happen in the first 7 days. Sorry, 90% of the views happen after the first 7 days, which is crazy because then you have long tail content on the internet. So you post something you work with an influencer 2 years ago, it still exists, right? People are going to still look for it. So it's evergreen. This is from a portfolio company also. This is Regs. The portfolio company worked with small YouTube influencers. Red is forecast and blue is the actual. So forget red, don't look at red, look at blue. When the portfolio company used small influencers, you could see spikes. but when a portfolio company used big influencers, you could see how that worked, right? So influencer marketing works. You need to identify the right influencer, the right channel, the right brand. He or she should be on brand. Shouldn't have committed crimes before. You have to do your basic criminal checks and so on, but it works. Beauty companies use a lot of influencer marketing because beauty products. There's a whole world on YouTube that's about beauty products, and basically beauty companies use them to sell products, right? The last thing I want to talk about is content marketing, which will be quick, but it ties in together with PR and brand partnerships. It's how do you build thought leadership? Assuming that you've got your growth and you've provided value, people know who you are. How do you continue, like Grab versus Uber, or I could cite so many different examples in the B2B and the B2C space. How do you remain relevant? How do you remain useful? A lot of people do this through infographics, through webinars, case studies, blogs. The whole point of content marketing is to create content that people find useful. That's number one rule of content marketing. A lot of people create content for the sake of creating content. They put up blog posts that are not useful, infographics that may not contribute towards a person's understanding of the problem or the solution. But the key thing about content marketing is to make sure that you're actually solving an adjacent problem, or make sure that there's value created in your post, in your webinar and whatever. So this is also another way for you to do once you've got a bigger team and bigger marketing team in place. Again, it goes down to people who respect your brand, so people who respect your opinion through your blog or through your webinars or through your infographics, who respect your brand, and they're far more likely to use your product, right? The thing about creating content is you have to understand what's the right way to distribute the content. So you can create webinars, case studies, exec briefings, blog posts. How are you going to distribute them? You can distribute them through social, through PR. You can distribute them through your website, through your internal partner organization. There's so many ways to think about content type and distribution. That's also another matrix that you need to think about. So lastly, this is my last slide. So there's so many things in the mobile growth world that you need to consider. I feel like this is, if you go to mobilegrowthstack.com, you'll find this slide. But ultimately, you can't do everything. It's impossible for you to do everything. Tinder, Spotify, Airbnb, companies that are in this stage also haven't really gotten all of this sorted yet. It's about prioritizing what's important for your company's life cycle. The fundamental things that you need to start doing are event tracking, attribution. You need to understand what events are being tracked. Over time, maybe you start thinking about attribution SDK to know where your users are coming from, what they're doing in the funnel. And then that's on the back end investment. On the front end, you won't be able to do all sorts of things as app store optimization, content marketing, performance marketing. You need to select a few things and figure out which is the most ROI positive initiative for your company. And we've spoken about how to define ROI. So there's so many things that you can do, but it's about picking and choosing what's important first. And that sort of ties back to the growth mentality and growth mindset, right? It's about being able to quantify everything, being highly experimental, and it's about focus. So start with what makes sense on this side, focus on things that are ROI positive on this side, and then start experimenting. If this doesn't work, focus on this, and then go deep. And then once you reach scale in one, go to another. So that's how you sort of build a growth-oriented organization and mindset. That's it. That's my closing thoughts. So thank you.
Thank you. That was an awesome presentation, Sriram. We're going to open the floor for Q&A. So anyone who has questions, do raise up your hand, and we will pass the mic to you. So, all right, cool.
Yep.
Hey, thanks for the insightful presentation, man. Could we go back to that slide where you brought up one of the first, the number of users acquired over the period of time using PR? You mentioned it was one of your portfolio companies. Yeah, that one.
Yep.
Right. So, without giving away the name of the company, could you tell us a little bit more about this particular company and whether PR-based marketing was the main reason to see this sort of growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a mobile app developer, consumer side. And I would say PR accelerated the growth. With this trajectory, it is inevitable that the company would have gotten to this level of growth at some point, let's say month 13 or maybe month 10, but PR accelerated that, right? PR in this case was acted as two different things. One is a step function. So if you're growing at this speed before, PR added this step function, and you're still growing at that speed after. So that step function, that's what PR did in this case. And the other thing the PR did was it accelerated the growth post-release, right? So let's say if you're growing at this speed pre-PR, which is pretty fast, right? So PR helped the step function increase and then accelerated your growth. Now over time that's going to slow down, but in this case it did that. So the trick here is, this is very early on in the company's trajectory, right? So PR had a huge impact. Now, what this company has done, this company is pretty new, is consistently use PR as a way, we call it PR waves. So they're sitting on lots of data. So they're doing one pitch a month. They don't want to overwhelm the press. So they one pitch a month on these things, right? So like they're crafting something, I'm making stuff up now, but they're crafting something like, these are the top 10 restaurants most visited by Uber, right? And then next month it's about, a product launch. And the following month is about, we've reached this metric. And the following month is, we've added a new investor. And then after that it comes back to this one. And then on top of that, because they've done this, they're tackling design publications. They're tackling engineering technical publications with white papers and so on. So you're just basically going gangbusters on all fronts. But they're a savvy PR machine. I've never seen anything like it. But it's definitely a tool to get you more thought leadership, more growth, more press. More brand goodwill and so on. That's a great question. So we have that person in that company. We have one person looking at brand and PR and using an agency to do that. Yeah. This is a Bay Area startup. Yeah. What's that? They're using an agency to do that. Yeah. So the brand PR person sitting in-house, but utilizing an agency for that. But you have to be on the agency 24/7 to make sure that. Here's the thing: the company is venture funded, so it has money to do this, and PR agency is a very important cost element for growth. So it's a very low retainer, but it's an important lever. Yeah. I don't know.
Hello. Good afternoon, Mr. Sriram. I have a question. If you have in your hand few projects on the apps.
What's that?
If you have a few projects in your apps or the ideas, what is the key metrics or any tools that we can use to speed up the testing, the validation period? Besides that, we have limited resource of funding or money. Then what is the key metrics that we can use to speed up the validation process?
To speed up the validation process.
Yeah, so that you don't go just the whole thing, then you fail at the end, or maybe you can use some tool that you can fail at the earlier beginning of the stage, so you can move to the next idea or something.
So you want to know tools that you can use to...
Yeah, tool or key metrics or anything.
Tools or what, sorry?
Or key metrics that you can use.
Okay, so it very much depends on what your app does. So what does the app or service, what does it do?
For the timing, I have the mobile spa or something that we can use for other people to call for.
A mobile what, sorry?
A mobile spa.
Okay.
So
mobile spa is mobile app spa,
yeah,
or actually a physical?
It's a portal that you can we call it. You have so many the spa provider inside the app itself. So sort of like a portal or something.
Oh, a booking point.
Yeah, sort of like a booking point or something.
Okay. So so let's assume that. Okay. So then I would look at. Okay. Then you're a two-sided marketplace of sort, right? In this case, what you have to do in any two-sided marketplace is make sure that there is sufficient supply. I'll answer your question in a bit. Sufficient supply. So in Uber's case, the only reason why Uber and Airbnb, not only, but the reason why they're in Grab are successful is because if you open the app, you get a Grab driver, Uber driver in 3 to 5 minutes, not 20, 30 minutes. And the reason why that's important to customers is because of convenience. But in order to do that, you need to focus on getting the right amount of suppliers, right, to be able to come up with results like that. So in any two-sided marketplace, you start with supply. So you start with sufficient spa providers, right? Make sure that you have enough options so that consumers go in and are able to have options. The metrics that I'll look at is basically, like the most simple one is I'll make sure that it's very easy for them to get into the product, website or app. And the second one is signups to see whether they're making reservations. And then if you want to simplify reservations, you can make it. You can choose. There are two ways to do this, right? At the point, if you're trying to optimize for number of reservations, are you trying to optimize for number of reservations that are paid or free? If you have very high friction, people are less likely to make a reservation. So what you could do is you could say, hey, reserve without paying, and then remind them to pay at the venue or after, right? This way there's low friction so people sign up. But then what you end up with is people who sign up but don't go for the spa treatment, right? So I would use at a very basic level number of signups actually to figure out whether people are using a product. If you don't have the number of signups required, then there's something wrong in the funnel or in the design or the flow that you need to figure out. If you want to improve number of signups, you can make it low friction. Don't get credit card details, then you can see number of signups go up. But if you introduce payments, then number of signups will go down, but you get people who will pay for it. So there's a trade-off there. But I'll look at that at a very fundamental level. I hope that half answers your question. Yeah.
Ram, I want to help you answer this question as well.
Yeah.
So I'm Adeline. When you're asking for validation, I mean, what we do as well in the startup at Clue is we do a lot of user testing. A lot of times when you to build something, actually you don't really need to build it. You can build prototypes and you look for people who might be wanting to use this particular feature. You talk to them, you ask them what's their pain point, do they actually really need it? So that's actually like one step even earlier before having all those matrices in. So talk to 10, 20 different people, look for them in Facebook, say like I am looking for people who are spa enthusiasts and we want to talk to you and ask them, what's their current issues right now? So maybe you might get other inspirations as well or features that you might want to put it in. So for Clue, we actually do a lot of user testing. We talk to our existing users, we talk to users who are not using the app and we say like, why are you not using it? So same thing, I think that's something you can think a little bit about and it's super low cost.
But these are things you should have done. Thank you for that. But these are things you must do before, like in order to understand whether or not your product is solving a problem. These are things that you need to have done before, and in this case also during. But I agree with that. Yeah.
All right, cool. One last question because we're running short of time. One last question and not too lengthy lah, kalau boleh. All right, cool.
Hi, I have a question on content marketing, but specifically on content creation.
Yeah.
Can you share a story of a organic growth based on content creation?
Can you start? Sorry, could you repeat that?
Organic growth, content creation without using social media, because everyone is going social media.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the organic growth using other platforms other than social media.
Yeah. So there are many platforms that you can use. You can use your own platform. So let's say you've got interesting content that you want to promote. You can start off with your own blog, your own website. And in order for you to make sure that this has maximum reach, you need to improve your website's domain authority, SEO. So you need to make sure that your site is highly trafficked and is ranked properly. So high like domain authority and so on, right? So you need to work on that first to make sure that everything is proper. Your sites end up actually, when you search for certain things, your site ends up on top. And then you can start pushing content through your site or your blog. You can also use what I call outside of social, for extra credibility and legitimacy, use potential partner. Okay, I'll break it down this way. So you have your own, and you have internal, external. Internal is social media, blog, website. If you're organizing events, then you push your content through your events, right? Now, external, these could be in the form of partners that you work with, that you co-host events with. Other publications like Forbes, Huffington Post, or affiliate type deals that you can work with to push your content. Doesn't necessarily mean social, but it could mean other more legitimate and credible publications that will rehash your story, right? So if you write something that's interesting, a lot of other publications will say, hey, I want to cite your story because it's interesting. Newsletters, I'll go after newsletters, often underused, but you need to identify industry newsletters that people sign up for and listen to, and read, and you go after them and say, hey, could you reproduce this content then? So then you basically amplify. So I'd use those external distribution channels also in tandem with social. There's obviously, you can pay for boosting your content and so on, which I think is rudimentary. So if you have a Facebook page, you create a content on Facebook, or you create your content on a blog, and then you post it on Facebook, and then you boost it to a bunch of cohorts. You can also do that, which a lot of people do. I'm not sure if that's a familiar concept, but boosting is pretty big in the whole world of content marketing. If you look at your newsfeed, you can see promoted by sponsored. So those are content that people boost. And one of the things that have come to light in the past few days is obviously the Russia Facebook thing. That's all about content. The Russia's meddling in the US elections through Facebook is all about content marketing. It's 100% content marketing through Facebook and Google. So what they do is they boost and they spend money on news that targets certain cohorts of users. So, but I'll rely on those things. If you don't want to pay money, I'll rely on those things. Yeah.
All right, that's all the time we have. A big swipe right. I mean, applause for Sriram. Thank you so much, Sriram.
Thank you, thank you.
Right, just a quick announcement. So earlier on, I mentioned do download the app Bizabo event app on the Google Store and also Apple App Store. Do fill out the survey form, and you have a chance to win prizes. Such as PS4 and Starbucks, depending on your luck. And next one is lunch is served. So there's lunch on the second floor. First floor, there's two places, the one in front here and also the one in co-working space. And the next session will start at 1:45 over here. It's a fireside chat called Rise from the Ashes. So that's all for this session. Thank you so much, guys. Enjoy your lunch.